it's almost like I was tricked into it, because somewhere between we're going to let our kids try lots of sports and today, I became a soccer fan. I didn't expect it. I grew up in a baseball household and a baseball community, and that's kind of what people did, but I fell in love with soccer, and I think some of it had to do with the fact that I was watching these two guys. We have Jackson on your right there. If there's anybody who's ever made that face more playing soccer, I would challenge you to find that person. He was serious about the game, even from a little age. And then we have Camden on the left side there. And Camden didn't really care that much about the game, but I will say this about Camden. Every team he was on won a medal. And so I don't know what it was he brought to the team, but they were pretty awesome every time he played. And the love of soccer began to grow, and I began to watch soccer happen outside of my kids playing. And so it would be Sporting Kansas City initially, and then Jackson introduced me to the English Premier League. The English Premier League is an English soccer league that is miles above and beyond what we have in the United States. The players are better, there's more money, there's more fans, there's more of everything really. And there's this one thing they have that I just love to watch, and I've enjoyed watching it develop over time, and that's the video assistant referee. Now we have that in the United States, right? They have something in the NBA and the MLB and the NFL, MLS. They've all got something that reviews, but let me just tell you right now, it pales in comparison to the review system that happens in English Premier League soccer. They just do it better, and I figured out why. It's because of the way they communicate. So let me just set the stage for you with what you're about to watch. In the video you're going to see, there's a team taking a corner kick. And what you're going to hear, and what is going to be highlighted on the screen for you, is the communication between the video assistant referee, who's watching in a booth, and the referee who is on the field, as they communicate about what they might be seeing, what might be taking place during the midst of this play. So, watch this.
Yeah, I've got an outswinging corner. Ball out of play could be a question mark.
Looking back post. Yeah,
can you take that for us?
Yeah, I've got it, mate. Down there.
Weird position, could be right.
Shot.
Possible offside.
Now.
Shot, possible handball. Just check.
We'll check it for me, the armies. Offside. Okay, maybe.
Calvo, just going to check the penalty for you. So the arm is, to me, in a natural position for the action he's making. The ball comes off the thigh and then makes a movement into that arm. I don't believe that should be a penalty kick. Ledger, are you seeing the same as me in this position?
I agree, mate. It's hit his thigh and he's retracting his arm as well, so I agree.
Confirmed.
And just like American players, they lose their minds, right? And after the call doesn't go their way. But here's what I love about the way they communicate. They say things like possible and could be and for me. And so before they reach a conclusion, they're having a conversation about the thing they've actually seen. They're not drawing conclusions before they have all the evidence, and in fact, it opens the opportunity for someone to admit that maybe what they saw or they thought they saw was incorrect. And here's the thing. Getting it right is more important to them than being right. And today, that's how we're going to think about our conversations as we deal with issues around politics. If we haven't had a chance to meet before, my name is Ryan, and you joined us smack dab in the middle of our series called Make Every Effort. And the goal of this series is to help us understand how we might interact with people in a way that regardless of who wins and regardless of what happens, that our relationships and our faith are intact on the other side of the election. Now, last week we kicked things off, and as we got going, we looked at a teaching that Jesus gave to his disciples. And what we learned is that Jesus gave this instruction to his disciples of something that they needed to do, something they had to do, something they were commanded to do. And so the people in the room who would say, I follow Jesus, like it wasn't an option for you to think about, I don't know if I want to do that. No, actually, this is what Jesus tells us to do. Now, let me hit pause for a moment and say this. Maybe today you're here and you're not quite sure about where you are in the question of faith. Maybe you came in, you have questions about what you believe or if you believe. Here's what I want you to think about today. Though today is a conversation geared specifically towards people who would consider themselves part of a church, part of this church maybe, what we're going to learn, the principles we're going to pull out are helpful for you regardless. Because I believe that if you live this way, the way we're going to talk about today, it makes the world a better place to be, and it makes you an easier person to be around. So last week's instruction was from Jesus, and Jesus said, if someone slaps you, turn the other cheek. And we looked really closely at why Jesus might have said it that way. He didn't tell us to ignore them. He didn't tell us to walk away from them. He didn't tell us to slap them back and seek retribution. No, Jesus says instead to offer them the other cheek, knowing that it was likely they were going to be slapped again. And along the way, as we began to unpack what it is Jesus was saying, we walked away with this truth. If we want to survive in the political season with our relationships and our faith intact, that first of all, we need to make every effort to be unoffendable. In everything we do, we need to make sure that we're not taking offense when we don't have to, because something's only offensive when we allow it to be. And it's hard to do, but it's not impossible. And the reason I think that it's possible to do is because we have a choice to make. We can make this decision to love people more than you love issues. When you do, as pastor, speaker Carlos Whitaker says, and you choose to walk with people instead of stand on issues, it gives you an opportunity to be engaged in conversation. It gives you an opportunity to come out on the other side with a more full understanding of what it is that someone else might believe or think. And so as we were having this discussion, we looked at Paul's letter to the church at Rome as maybe if we want to love people more than issues, we might need to think about how we do that. And Paul begins to unpack for us in Romans chapter 12 what it looks like to be a person who can live this kind of life. And so let's read Romans 12, starting in verse 2. He writes, "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Don't think you're better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. To be unoffendable means that you will need to be transformed because you are wired to be offended. You are wired to want things your own way. But the teachings of Jesus go against the grain. And he says, if you want to live this kind of life, you have to live differently. And it's not easy. In fact, I think it's really difficult to do, but buckle up because today it gets harder. Because today we keep reading what the Apostle Paul writes and we discover this truth. We need to make every effort to honor others. And before we jump in, I just want to pause for a moment and pray. Will you pray with me? God, today would you speak to our hearts? Help us to see a picture of what it looks like to live this kind of life. A life where we're engaging in conversation. A life where we're unoffended. A life when we're offering honor to other people. And God, help us to hear what is said and not what is not said. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So today's message picks up the ball from where Paul is writing in Romans chapter 12. And so we get down to verse 10, and it reads this way. Love one another with genuine affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. The big idea that we don't want to miss today is make every effort to honor others. And I love the way that Paul says it. He says we should outdo each other in showing honor. We're a competitive people, aren't we? I mean, I see all the red. We're going to cheer for the Chiefs to win today, and we're going to be a little bit upset if they don't win, aren't we? I mean, last week, have you ever been more thankful that the tight end had big feet, right? I mean, come on. We were fired up about this moment because he was out of bounds. We're competitive. We want to win. 1 was great. 2 was even better. And 3, yes, that's what we're after as Chiefs fans, isn't it? I saw this come to life at the Big Give on Friday night. So many of you showed up and you bought tickets and you ate and you spent time together and it was so much fun. But the best part for me was watching you bid against each other on items. You get competitive and you pay more for something than it's actually worth just to say that you want it. And every dollar went to benefit organizations that are making an impact, including the mobile food pantry right here at the Summit Church. And CG shared with you earlier that we raised $105,000. But listen to this. Last year, we were super stoked when we set a record for Big Give proceeds. And last year, we made $76,000, which means this year, 38% more. Isn't that incredible? And it happened because we're a competitive people. So what would happen if we channeled that competitive spirit into honoring other people? Pastor and theologian John Wesley defines honor as habitually considering what is good in others. If you want to honor someone, you think about all the good that is in them. And there's a place for us to practice this on a daily basis. I mean, have you ever been on social media before? This is a place where someone is going to post something out of pocket, something crazy, something not true, something that's AI generated, right? All this stuff is going to be out there, and if you log on today, you will see it, and you have a choice to make. Are you going to jump in, and are you going to get negative, or are you going to choose to honor the other person? I mean, here's my approach to that. When someone posts something that I think is maybe just a little out there, and I'm like, I'm not sure about that, I remind myself how much I love them. I remind myself how much I enjoy spending time with them. I remind myself how much I like their family. Now, don't get me wrong. I may hit the mute button and get 30 free days without their nonsense. But I don't have to step away from them completely, and the relationship doesn't have to end, because this is really important. People are more than the collection of their opinions. We can believe differently, and yet we can still stay in relationship with each other. So as Paul continues writing, he tells us if we're going to honor each other, if we're going to outdo each other in giving honor, that there are some things we can do. And so we're going to continue reading Romans chapter 12, and we're going to pull 3 of these things out today. And along the way, I'm going to share with you what you can do, even now, even tomorrow, to begin to live out what Paul is saying. Here we are, Romans chapter 12, verse 11. Never be lazy. Another sermon for another day. But work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble, and keep on praying. I love this focus on prayer because it reminds us of this first thing we can do to show honor, which is focus on what unites, not what divides. Here's an unpopular opinion that I hold, that I wholeheartedly believe is true. That those who you disagree with politically likely share some of your same ideas about what the future could hold. In other words, we want to go to the same place. We just disagree about how we're going to get there. This is true of my family, for sure. I'm not about to jump in and tell you about our political persuasions in our family. I'm going to tell you about how we get from point A to point B. We have 3 drivers in our family, and each of us use a different map app on our phones. So let's say, for example, we were going to go from church to Joe's Kansas City Barbecue at 47th Street, the original, the good one, the gas station. You've probably been there. If we're going to get from here to there, here's what I would do. I would open Google Maps, and I would ask it to navigate there for me. And it would tell me how I'm going to get there. 32 minutes, 18 miles. I'm going to be there in no time. Life is going to be good, and I will be enjoying a Z-Man. Okay? And now, here's the thing. Not everyone in my household agrees with me. If Rebecca were going to drive, she would open Apple Maps, and it would take her 32 minutes, the same amount of time, but she would drive 23 miles because Apple Maps says, hey, instead of going directly there, what if we drove past and came back from the other way? And Rebecca loves that because she loves the scenic route, apparently. I was warned before I shared this not to malign Apple Maps too much, but I am the one with the microphone, so it is what it is. And finally, if Jackson was coming with us, he would open Waze, the community source map that refuses to use highways, if at all possible. And so he would drive through all of the potholes in our city. It would take him 2 minutes longer. He wouldn't travel quite as far, but the repair bill on the car from dodging the potholes speaks for itself. We're going the same place, but we had different ways of getting there. Now, make no mistake, the same is true when it comes to more serious issues in our lives. Let's think for a moment about the issue of gun control. I mean, I've got to think that the sane people on both sides of the issue, acknowledging that there are the outliers, the sane people on both sides of the issue would say that what we want to do is live in a safe world. We want to live in a safer world. And so how do we do that? Well, do we do that by increasing the restrictions on guns to make sure that fewer are available? Or do we do that by allowing anyone to own a gun or more people to own a gun so that you're afraid that if you do something, there's someone with a gun who may defend themselves? And that's a gross oversimplification of the issue. I understand that, but you see what I'm saying, don't you? This is an issue that our country must deal with. Just last week, we had threats against schools in Lee Summit, a very specific threat against the Lee Summit Middle School. These are issues that as a country we have to sort out. And at the end of the day, we likely agree that we want schools to be safe places where kids can go to learn and teachers don't have to worry about defending students. But the question is, how do we get there? And we honor others. We acknowledge that there might be a different way, there might be a different path, there might be a different direction. And yet we engage in the conversation and we commit to getting there together because our disagreement doesn't need to lead to dishonor. So here's what you can do tomorrow morning to live this out. You can disagree and commit. You know, people say a lot of times, agree to disagree. And that is one way to do things, right? Agree to disagree. That gets you nowhere. Disagree and commit is what I would suggest is maybe a better way to approach that. Because we should disagree. Because when we disagree, we get better, we get smarter, we're forced to defend our position or think about our position or make a decision. That makes us better in all kinds of ways. But when we stop there and we simply agree to disagree, we spin our wheels. When we disagree and commit, we acknowledge we're coming from different places, and yet we commit to honor each other, we commit to learn more about the issues, we commit to think about why we have made the decisions we have made. So we focus on what unites, not what divides. Verse 14, Paul continues writing. Bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. The second thing we can do in our effort to honor others is to refuse to criticize those who see the world differently than you do. Refuse to criticize those who see the world differently than you do. To approach faith and to approach politics and bring your faith to it requires that you approach it with humility. You don't have all the answers because there's a tension between following God and living in a community of people. So how do we live this out? If we say, okay, I want to be okay with them believing differently, but I want to be able to have a relationship with them still and not write them off, how do I engage in relationship? Well, there are two things I want you to know. Number one is that we must be engaged. Now, you know, if you've come to this church before and you've heard me talk about politics before, that I will not tell you how to vote. There is not a Summit Church cheat sheet that you're taking into the polling location with you, thank God. Instead, I want to help you understand Scripture and know what God's picture of what the world could be so that when you walk into the voting booth and you know what God is doing in this world, that you're casting a vote for the kind of world you want to live in, the kind of world that God has placed you to be in. You should vote. You should have opinions. You should bring your faith to your politics. The early church thrived not because they were insular, but because they were engaged in culture. The entirety of the New Testament is composed of books written to people who are struggling in relationships with other people. Nearly every book. Here's how you get along with others. Here's how you should treat others. Why? Because they needed to be reminded how to live together. Number two, we must be Christlike. Theologian N.T. Wright offers this kind of sad commentary on the world. He said, Christians need to be reminded you're not exempt from following basic human moral standards. And it's really scary that I think sometimes people of faith assume that because you have a faith, you can say whatever you want to say. And in actuality, having a faith means that you need to say less of what it is you actually want to say because you owe it to others to engage with them in a way that's meaningful and helpful and winsome. And this means that we cannot buy into a win-at-all-costs mentality. If you support a candidate or an issue, and you do so and you sacrifice your Christian witness and your relationships with other people, and you win on election day, you actually haven't won at all. You've actually lost the things that matter the most. When you refuse to criticize people who see the world differently, it's here that you're beginning to live as Jesus lived. Just a few moments ago, you saw on the screen Cole Jennings, our student ministry coordinator. He comes to us from Ozark Christian College in Joplin, but before that, he grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. His dad is a pastor. And last week after I preached the message, Cole said, hey, have you read my dad's book? And as much as I love Cole, I didn't know his dad, and his dad had a book. So the answer was no. And he said, well, hey, my dad and you sort of have similar ideas about this stuff. You might want to take a look. And so I grabbed the book and I took a look. And it tells a story of how people engage in conversation, really using a metaphor of trench fighting. And so you hunker down in your trenches, and other people hunker down in their trenches, and in between there's this area called the no man's land. Have you heard of that? And his encouragement in this book is to be a person who comes to the no man's land and engages in conversation. Here's what he writes. He says, one of the greatest challenges of our day is to learn how to pursue truth and peace at the same time. We're really good at one or the other, aren't we? I can tell the truth and it's going to cause turmoil, or I can keep the peace, but everything that needs to be said is left unsaid. What if we're people who can say things that are true and also bring peace? That's what it looks like to engage people and to refuse to criticize those who believe differently than we do. Number 3, Paul continues writing, verse 15. Be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to keep the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all. The third thing that we can do as we make every effort to honor others is to engage others with curiosity. So we begin by focusing on what unites, not what divides. And we refuse to criticize those who see the world differently. And then if we want to keep that relationship moving, we engage others with curiosity. Have you ever been in a room with someone who knew every answer to every question? It shuts down quit elbowing your wife, okay? So it shuts down every conversation. When someone thinks they know it all, it ends the opportunity to engage. It eliminates the possibility that you can talk and reach a conclusion. I saw this in action on Tuesday night. Maybe you did too. It was happening on the debate floor of the presidential debate. 2 people who arrived with exactly what they thought and what they knew, unwilling to hear from the other side, and neither one was likely to change their mind about anything. What if we approach life differently than this? See, this is a picture of politics that people get, and they think, oh, that's what politics is. It is, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be us engaging people with curiosity. It can be us asking questions instead of demanding answers. So how do I live this out? You remember this, your words matter. The goal, or how you speak, sets the tone of the conversation. Our disagreements are transformed into discussions when we can engage in a conversation with curiosity. How might we do that? We say things like, here's how I see it, or in my opinion, or from my perspective, or say more about that, or tell me more, or what am I missing? The video assistant referee in the English Premier League doesn't start with, that's not a handball. He started with, it might have hit his thigh before it hit his arm. For me, that's not a penalty. And eventually, the decision is reached. Because in our conversations with people, the goal isn't simply to arrive at a conclusion. The goal is to gather enough information so that a conclusion can be reached. And those 2 approaches are worlds apart. One burns bridges, and one tears down walls. The Apostle Paul is serious about this. The whole chapter, Romans chapter 12, is telling us how to live this life that's different than the world around us. How not to be transformed or conformed into the likeness of the culture around us. And he gives us this instruction. Verse 10, love one another with genuine affection, outdo one another in showing honor. And what we know is honoring isn't easy. In fact, it can be very difficult because people are hard to deal with. But if we want to honor God, it means that we also honor others. And so if your goal is to end up on the other side of the election with your faith intact and your relationships intact, maybe today is the day that you just make the decision that you are going to make every effort to honor others.